2005, a band from France dropped an album about space whales. Yeah, you heard that right. But this wasn't just some weird prog experiment. This thing hit like tectonic freaking plates colliding. From Mars to Sirius didn't just put Gojira on the map. It redrew the entire map of metal. It was brutal and beautiful at the same time. Riffs heavy enough to crush continents. Melodies were so huge, they felt cosmic. And they did it all from a self-made studio on the outskirts of France. And whether you know it or not, modern metal is still chasing this record. By the way, I'm Kane Irvine. This is the heaviest show in the universe. I'm a lifelong metalhead. It's all I do, all the time. And today, we're riding the space whale that changed metal forever. This is how From Mars to Sirius changed everything. You might see Gojira now as one of metal's biggest bands. I mean, they just became the first metal band to ever play an Olympic opening ceremony. But it wasn't always like that. Back in 2004, Gojira wasn't even known outside of France. Their first two albums, killer, but stuck in Europe entirely. The Link and Terra Incognita were great, but sadly they had barely any reach. They were like buried treasure that only locals knew about. Gojira were broke, grinding out tours, trying to stay afloat. But the key was their ambition. And while a lot of death metal bands chased the same formula, Gojira wanted something completely different. Even on their early demos, when they were known as the American name Godzilla, you could tell they weren't like the rest. They didn't sound Swedish or Floridian. They were more like if Deicide got lost in the French countryside. And here's the kicker. To level up, they didn't beg for a big label. They built their own damn studio, way out in rural France. Le Studio des Milans. A DIY lab where they could control everything. No label clock ticking, no outside producer, just Gojira, just their vision. That gamble would pay off huge. Because in that barn-turned-studio, they forged From Mars to Sirius, the record that turned a local act into global superstars. So what made this album so different? Why did this one explode while the first two barely cracked outside France? Well, the answer is brutality met melody in a way nobody had pulled off before. When Mars to Sirius dropped in 2005, the effect was immediate. This wasn't just another heavy record. It was a masterpiece in every sense of the word. Imagine a tsunami colliding with a symphony. That's what this album feels like. One critic even called it, quote, astonishing fluidity between the utmost heaviness and delicate melody. In other words, it fucking slapped. Hard. Gojira were as heavy as any death metal band on earth, but they built something cinematic out of it. Storms of riffs crashing into serene, otherworldly passages. Brutality and beauty braided together. I mean, let's talk about Mario Duplantier's drumming here. Absolutely legendary. It's legit drum porn for percussion nerds. Intricate polyrhythms, relentless double bass, grooves that feel like a tectonic shift. Every fill hits like aftershocks from an earthquake. And of course, the guitars, massive, syncopated, mechanical, methodical. The signature Gojira pick scrape, it sounds like steel being ripped in half. And Joe Duplantier's vocals shift like weather. From guttural growls that ride the riffs like thunder to soaring chants that carry melodies through the storm. Tracks like Backbone and The Heaviest Matter of the Universe, this channel's namesake, are pure weight. Straight up some of the heaviest shit ever pressed on a disc. Meanwhile, World to Come and the interlude Unicorn let in a little bit of light to calm the listener down. Breathers of melody that make the next riff feel like 10 times heavier. And then, of course, there's the epic Flying Whales, one of the most crushing, heaviest metal tracks ever released. Several minutes of build-up and whale calls, and then one of the most colossal riffs that feels like the ocean floor is cracking open. Loudwire straight up called it one of the best riffs and breakdowns of the century. They weren't exaggerating, but it wasn't just the riffs. There was something else about this album that made it so epic. This album had a message, a whole concept. It tells the story of an interplanetary journey from a dying planet, Mars, to a distant star, Sirius, with the goal of one day resurrecting the vibrant life of the now dead Mars planet. From chaos to harmony, from destruction to renewal. And yeah, it's also about saving whales and saving the planet, and using the behemoth creatures to bring us new life on another planet. Basically, riding whales through space to a new home, a second chance. In 2005, no other band this heavy was talking about things like climate change, or spiritual rebirth, or the fate of Earth. Nowadays, you've got all sorts of bands from Opeth and Rivers of Nile to Black Braid talking about the same type of stuff. Everyone else was screaming about gore or demons. And like I said, maybe at this time, Opeth was the exception. Gojira was out here screaming about the planet whales and somehow making pits erupt while they did it. Absolutely wild. They showed death metal could carry a conscience. A conscientious monster, as one reviewer put it. Brutal but positive. Heavy but hopeful. And here's the craziest part about all of this. It wasn't made with $1 million budget. This whole epic was built DIY. Let's talk about how Gojira pulled that off. Remember that countryside studio that I could barely pronounce? Well, incredibly, that's where this album was born. Gojira recorded it themselves, produced it themselves. No label execs, no superstar producer. Joe Duplantier even designed the artwork, the flying space whale himself. The whole project was them, Gojira, top to bottom. And it worked because the band, they had total freedom. Nobody was telling them, make it shorter or write a single we can play on the radio. They went all in on a 66-minute concept album with whale noises, and it turned into their masterpiece. It wasn't easy. They took the production techniques they learned on Terra Incognita and The Link and ran with them. But that gave it this raw, organic energy. The drums tracked at La Florida Studio became like cannons. The guitars chugged like a continental drift. The mix breathes, massive, but never overcompressed. Every detail feels intentional because it was. It's rare to hear an album where you can feel the band's fingerprints on every sound. No stupid record production labels forcing their ideas of what it needed to sound like on the band. From Mars to Sirius is one of those albums. And that authenticity, fans felt it immediately. Which brings up the legacy, because this record didn't just make waves in 2005, my friends. I mean, 2 decades later, it's still considered one of the greatest metal albums ever. Since its release, From Mars to Sirius has only grown bigger in reputation. Rolling Stone ranked it one of the 100 greatest metal albums of all time. Metal Hammer and Loudwire both placed it in the top metal albums of the 21st century. Decibel even put it in their Hall of Fame. Critics called it flawless, consistent, a masterpiece. Fans, they just call it their favorite album, and I gotta agree. Ask around and you'll hear it. Flying Whales changed my life. Backbone literally blew my back out. Look, I even named this channel after the track The Heaviest Matter of the Universe. This album has its tentacles all throughout the community. It's one of those records people remember discovering. And on stage, these songs are still completely fire. When the whale intro hits, crowds lose it because they know what's coming. They know they're about to get slapped in the face. When Where Dragons Dwell kicks in, pits erupt. These tracks become anthems. Death metal bands are still trying to achieve the same level of heaviness as Gojira had here. 2 middling results, I might add. But maybe the biggest legacy is what it proved. That extreme metal can be intelligent, elegant, and melodic. That it can care about the planet. That it can be as beautiful as it is brutal. Bands like Rivers of Nile owe their careers to this album. From Mars to Sirius changed everything. It launched Gojira from French underground to world stages. It expanded what death metal could be. And it gave us a record that's brutal, beautiful, and completely timeless. It's not just one of the best metal albums of the 21st century, it's one of the best metal albums of all time. So, here's to Space Whales, my friends, to the riffs that shook the earth, and to the melodies that carried hope, and to the album that truly bent the genre to its will. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this one, check out this video on Whitechapel's The Valley, which has the same emotional impact as this one. And speaking of emotional impacts, check out this video on Slipknot's Iowa. As always, long live metal.